Hello, my name is Father Enzo Del Brocco. I'm a Passionist priest. I hold a PhD in healthcare ethics, and I'm currently president of Catholic Theological Union. Magnifica Humanitas opens with two biblical images, the Tower of Babel and the rebuilding of Jerusalem under Nehemiah. The contrast frames Pope Leo XIV's moral vision for the age of artificial intelligence. Babel symbolizes a society driven by centralized power, self-sufficiency, and technical mastery. Humanity seeks greatness through its own abilities, but communion is lost in the process. Leo XIV warns that the Babel Tower reveals the dangers of systems that prioritize efficiency and control while neglecting human dignity. In relation to artificial intelligence, Babel reflects the concentration of technological power in a small number of institutions that increasingly shape how people communicate, work, and form opinions. The danger lies not only in technology itself, but in the assumption that technological expertise alone can determine humanity's future. On the other hand, Jerusalem offers an alternative model. After destruction and exile, the city is rebuilt through cooperation among families, workers, priests, and civic leaders. Each group contributes according to its abilities, and diversity is directed toward a common purpose. Pope Leo emphasizes that Jerusalem is reborn through shared responsibility, making it a symbol of how society should approach AI. Instead of allowing technology to be shaped by centralized authority or private interests alone, the Pope proposes a rebuilding together through participation, accountability, and dialogue. What he's proposing is more than a moral framework for AI. He offers a vision for how humanity might govern technological civilization itself. The primary choice, he writes, is not between a yes or no to technology, but rather between constructing Babel or rebuilding Jerusalem. Public debates about artificial intelligence often revolve around familiar binaries: regulation or innovation, optimism or fear, acceleration or restraint. Magnifica Humanitas reframes the discussion. The deeper challenge is not whether humanity adopts powerful technologies, but whether societies can govern them without sacrificing dignity, pluralism, and responsibility. One of the encyclical's strongest insights is that the Church's contribution to the AI age may not be a policy blueprint, but a practice of shared discernment. Leo XIV makes it clear that the social doctrine of the Church, and so not simply a body of teachings, is not just a handbook of principles or norms to be applied, but a process of shared discernment. Now, this distinction is important because it shifts the Church's role from merely offering fixed answers to helping societies navigate moral complexity together. For this reason, Pope Leo presents synodality not simply as a way of being church, but as a way of seeking truth together, particularly when artificial intelligence raises questions too complex for any single discipline to answer alone. For example, engineers understand systems, but not always their social consequences. Politicians regulate technologies they often struggle to understand. Economists measure efficiency while overlooking dignity and cohesion. Educators witness how digital culture reshapes attention, but cannot redesign technological systems. Theologians defend moral anthropology, yet cannot solve technical governance questions. Artificial intelligence exposes the limits of isolated expertise. Pope Leo, in fact, warns against the technocratic paradigm, a term developed by Pope Francis in Laudato Si. The problem with technocracy is not technology itself, but the belief that technical expertise alone can solve human problems. With the technocratic paradigm, efficiency becomes confused with wisdom, and optimization replaces discernment. Human beings risk becoming variables to manage, rather than persons capable of shaping the common good. Against this tendency, Pope Leo proposes synodality as an alternative. Pluralism, he writes, does not collapse into disorder, but through the practice of synodality, becomes the space in which humanity rediscovers its solid foundations and its final end. The question is no longer simply who governs technology, but how societies discern together. Technocracy assumes specialist optimized systems for everyone else. Synodality instead offers another path. Communities collectively reflect on what kind of future deserves to be built. Therefore, the more fundamental question raised by artificial intelligence becomes, what does it mean today to be human? For Leo XIV, the process of discernment depends on how this question is answered. The Catholic Church proposes a moral compass rooted in the dignity of the human person, insisting that technological development must always remain at the service of humanity rather than replace or diminish it. From this foundation flow the core principles of Catholic social doctrine: the common good, the universal destination of goods, subsidiarity, solidarity, and social justice. Together, these principles provide a framework for evaluating whether technological progress genuinely serves human flourishing rather than efficiency, power, or profit alone. Jerusalem ultimately becomes a symbol of cooperation, where different voices contribute to a shared future. In an age shaped by technological concentration and social fragmentation, synodality offers a vision grounded not in domination or uniformity, but in communion and collective wisdom.
I'm Diane Bergant, a sister of St. Agnes from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and I am the Carol Stuhlmuller Professor of Old Testament Studies, Emerita. I've been invited to share a few reflections on the recent document written by Pope Leo XIV, Magnifica, Humanitas. Our world is filled with attempts to seize control of markets and spheres of influence. Let me say that again. Our world is filled with attempts to seize control of markets and spheres of influence. So writes Pope Leo XIV in the conclusion of his first encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas. Throughout that document, he insists that humankind, that magnificent creature made in the image of God, is charged with bringing forth the reign of God within this world. But how is the responsibility to be accomplished? In the way our ancestors set up a Tower of Babel? Our generation faces a similar challenge in the guise of artificial intelligence. In robotics as well. How are we to benefit appropriately from these remarkable new discoveries? It was not uncommon for societies to erect tall structures securely grounded in the earth with their tops reaching for the heavens. Such structures often suggest direct access to heaven without the need of divine assistance. This was the error at Babylon. What is true of the tower might be true of contemporary technological capabilities as well. In both the ancient world and in the innovative technologies of artificial intelligence, extraordinary human performance can easily be erroneously overregarded. Human beings have a tendency of doing that. We find ourselves then striving to make a name for ourselves. We can certainly marvel at such engineering or technological feats we can accomplish if they enhance human ingenuity, not minimize it. An example of minimizing it, displacing workers with robots. In fact, the Tower of Babel and all subsequent feats of excellence are not accomplished without God. They can only be accomplished with God working through us. The second passage to which Pope Leo refers sketches plans for rebuilding the city of Jerusalem and the human community that had escaped captivity in Babylon. A major concern of this rebuilding was the observance of strict liturgical purity. Priestly or royal lineage was required of those who participated in any way in this sacred project. Not everybody could help. Nehemiah and those involved in this sacred project held themselves in strict compliance with these regulations of what is called sacred purity. Their goal was to please God, not to achieve prominence for themselves. Their building project might have been as grandiose as was that of the craftsmen of Babylon, but they were motivated by religious sentiments to please God, not just to please themselves. The technological advances of today might promise advanced productivity, but at what price? Has social interaction been enhanced or replaced? How is personal value determined? By production? How are we to engage in this current chapter of human advancement? We're at the beginning, most of us are at the beginning of learning something about AI. And so we should do some serious thinking before we make too many mistakes, significant mistakes. So, how are we to engage in this current chapter of human advancement? Are we intent on fashioning a name for ourselves? Are we in a race to make sure that this country gets it before this country so that we can say we are the ones who got it? Or are we truly using it, or do we intend to use it in order to build a sacred city, in order to bring forth the reign of God? We may not be responsible and controlling everything, but we are responsible for making significant decisions. How are we going to do this?
Hello, my name is Kevin Considine. I'm the director of the Robert J. Schreiter Institute for Precious Blood Spirituality and assistant professor in systematic theology at Catholic Theological Union. God's glory is the human person fully alive. Now that is a famous saying from St. Irenaeus of Lyon from the 2nd century. It means that everything that it is to be human is a gift from God, and that God takes joy in our very humanity. The frailty, the vulnerability, the ambiguity, and the imperfection of being human. These are not unfortunate byproducts of original sin, but rather gifts from God imbued in the very fashioning of us as God's beloved sons and daughters. We grow, we make mistakes, we learn, we seek repair, and to make a more just, more beautiful, and more humane social order that can be in tune with our ecological home. This is Christian humanism. And this is the vision of the human person offered in Pope Leo's encyclical Magnifica Humanitas. As Dorothy Day, a kindred spirit in faith for both Pope Francis and Pope Leo pointed out, we cannot live alone. We cannot go to heaven alone. Otherwise, God will say to us, where are all the others? The goal is a Christian humanism where we fully acknowledge and fully embrace our needs and responsibilities for relationships and for one another. Now, new technologies usually spark renewed thinking about the human person. In this way, artificial intelligence represents a change in eras and a radically new context for being authentically human in the way offered by Jesus. AI has developed quickly. It already is part of the tools for daily life. and we don't know what we don't know about its effects. What we do know is that AI is not morally neutral, and it is neither the salvation nor the destruction of humankind. It is a new complexity shaping the global common good, whose effects are not yet fully understood. So, the Pope's main concern here is with the protection and promotion of human dignity in a global context that is rapidly changing and that is full of gross inequalities. Leo continues to develop Francis's understanding of the human person from Fratelli Tutti as inherently social and relational. And as such, one should carry God's own image. And here, I point you to paragraphs 118 and 119, and please allow me to quote these at length. He writes, quote, "Our relationship with life seems to be in crisis today. Everything that appears as a limit, incapacity, illness, old age, suffering, vulnerability, tends to be seen primarily as a defect to be corrected, rather than as a reality through which our humanity matures and opens itself to relationship. And yet we must remember that humanity flourishes not despite limitations, but often through them. It is precisely within our limitations that the following find a place: compassion, as well as a sincere concern for the needs of others, a generosity that can emerge even in the midst of darkness and failure, spiritual experience in the worship of God. We see this at many moments when our limits become tangible. When we face rejection, when we suffer the illness or loss of a loved one, when we encounter our own weakness or failure. Mysteriously, it is precisely in such moments that we can discover a new wisdom, tangibly experience the closeness of others, and encounter the presence of the Lord." Unquote. So Leo's heart here is clear. Humankind is not a project to be perfected by AI once and for all, or to be replaced by AI. Our vulnerability is not a problem to be fixed, but a strength to be fostered. Our frailty is not a disease from original sin, but rather a good that orients us for building healthy and meaningful relationships with others. God's glory is the human person fully alive. Pope Leo, an Augustinian, reminds us that St. Augustine is as much a Christian humanist as St. Irenaeus of Lyon, as are so many women and men in our long tradition. As we adapt to a world that is changing faster than many of us can keep up, let us all heed the heart of Pope Leo. Being human is good. Yes, there is original sin, but an original goodness and grace precedes that and continues to be alive within us, among us, and holding us together as communities. Let us choose to be fully human in all of its messiness, all of its ambiguity, and all of its limitations. For it is there, Leo reminds us, we encounter ourselves in communion with God, each other, and all of creation.
I'm Steve Millies, professor of public theology and director of the Bernardine Center at Catholic Theological Union. Early in Magnifica Humanitas, Pope Leo recalls how some people objected when his predecessor, Pope Leo XIII, began the modern period in Catholic social teaching, writing Rerum Novarum in 1891 in response to the rise of industrialization. Those critics thought that the Church should not waste energy on worldly matters, but instead focus on communicating the message of eternal life. Leo XIV has an answer for that, and it has also been the answer of every bishop of Rome since Rerum Novarum. The proclamation of the gospel cannot overlook the concrete lives of people. The social doctrine of the Church is not something extra in Catholic faith. Catholic social teaching's principles for living as Christian believers in the world have deep roots in the writings of Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, and most of all, in Scripture. Pope Leo wants us to know that they are an integral part of the Catholic tradition, even though we don't talk about them as much as we should. There's an old joke that says Catholic social doctrine is the Church's best-kept secret. Pope Leo's not satisfied with that. He tells us that Magnifica Humanitas is here in part to help us rediscover our duty of implementing the principles of Catholic social teaching. Again and again, Pope Leo underscores how this is a duty of faith. Pope Leo writes, "The Church's social doctrine brings us to the very heart of our faith. the mystery of the living God, revealed in Jesus Christ, who, as a communion of three persons, is love itself in relationship, expressed in the mutual gift of self and in sharing with the world. For Leo, the mystery of God as love is the source of social doctrine. We should not be surprised that the world is so hostile to human dignity and human flourishing as long as we, Roman Catholic believers, are not as familiar as we could be with the Church's demanding social teaching, which tells us how to share ourselves with the world in love. We hear that Magnifica Humanitas is an encyclical letter about artificial intelligence. It is. But the encyclical only can speak about AI because it stands on more than a century of authoritative doctrine insisting that every human person has a right, not just to survive, but to flourish and reach the fullest potential God created them for. First, with last year's De Lexite, and again with Magnifica Humanitas, Pope Leo tells us that the poor, the vulnerable person, or anyone in a difficult situation has the first claim on our attention, always. In some of his earliest remarks after his election, Leo reminded us how Pope Francis told us that the poor are a treasure for the Church. As much as the rise of industrialization once did, artificial intelligence and the concentration of great wealth the digital revolution has made possible threatens to place human dignity and flourishing farther out of reach for too many people. The answer to that problem, and the way to transform these digital tools into a benefit for the whole human race, is for Catholic believers to take up this duty of faith. We have to live Catholic social doctrine every day.
Buen día. I'm Carmenenko Fernandez, professor of Hispanic theology and ministry at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. Let us not be afraid to get our hands dirty on the construction site of our time. With urgency, in these words, Pope Leo charges us all, Catholics, Christians, and people of goodwill. In his encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, Leo identifies that construction site as a civilization of love, an ongoing project at the heart of over a century of Catholic social teaching. The predominant metaphor of Leo's encyclical is the act and process of building. He focuses our collective energies on tending our construction site, impacted by res novae that challenge us today to consider what it means to be human. He observes, quote, while some are vying for the future of new technologies and others dedicate themselves to reflecting on the matter, most people are watching and waiting, observing from afar, and merely hoping for the best. Leo calls us out of passivity, complacency, and resignation with a metaphor rooted in manual labor. To get our hands dirty is an appeal to respond with an investive, exertive, and embodied participation. What does it mean to get our hands dirty in an era of digital transformation? The Pope proposes 5 paths for our praxis. These are directions for all of us, including those involved in the development, use, and propagation of AI and other digital technologies. First, Leo professes the need to disarm words. This is not to be confused with silencing. Rather, it is a call to speak up in ways that do not replicate behaviors that denigrate the dignity and humanity of others, including those who might be considered adversaries. Leo also uses the term to disarm with reference to AI. He explains, quote, to disarm does not mean rejecting technology, but preventing it from dominating humanity. Second, Leo encourages building peace through justice. For Leo, peace is neither a naive hope nor merely the absence of war, and it is expected to guide our daily interactions and relationships. Leo describes justice in terms of who suffers most from failed peace and justice denied. This insight leads to his third direction, adopting the perspective of victims. The meteoric and unregulated rise of AI puts us all in a position of vulnerability and a loss of control, something those with privilege don't often experience. The preferential option for the poor and vulnerable, however, demands that in our discernment, decisions, and actions, we consider first their impact on those among us affected the hardest by the economic fallout and the exploitation of labor and resources. Fourth, cultivating a healthy realism is predicated upon a realization that if one suffers, we all suffer. Disinformation, whether it's spread out of malevolence or ignorance, is dangerous to us all. It compromises trust and reduces truth to a relative concept. War, no matter how remote, has rippling consequences, experienced across our globe locally, economically, and in the damage done to our common home. Solidarity unveils the futility and the risks of naive optimism, indifference, and despair. We are called to a critical analysis and engagement with the complex realities of our times, a responsibility suited not only to our social scientists, philosophers, educators, and theologians, but to our artists, poets, construction workers, students, and street prophets as well. The fifth trajectory, reviving dialogue and multilateralism, spurs us to listen deeply, to recognize the strengths and limitations of our perspectives, to strategize together, to negotiate with an understanding that we are interconnected, to foster relationships, yet realize that first we may need to do the painful work of repairing, healing, reconciling, restoring. It is serendipitous that less than a month after the release of his encyclical, Leo visited Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, Spain. It is estimated that this basilica, begun in 1882, will be completed in 2036. A perennial construction site, it bears the imprint of 144 years of laborers, artists, donors, and dreamers. Eclectic in design, Sagrada Familia reflects the vision of its architect, Antoni Gaudí, yet it reveals the subtle but distinctive touches from subsequent generations of artisans. The edifice holds memories of struggles that are scarred and even attempted to destroy it. In recent years, technological and digital advances help accelerate the building process to this near completion point. Embedded into the first facade, completed by Gaudí before his death in 1926, is the local presence of his time. From the flora and fauna to the hens and the donkey to the biblical figures, all are real beings and real people. The models were construction workers, a tavern keeper, mothers, fathers, and their children, military buglers, and an infant girl. as the newborn Jesus. In the faces and bodies from the Nativity through the flight into Egypt, the old neighborhood comes to life again, an enduring reminder of who the church is and who the builders are and must be. Let us not be afraid to get our hands dirty on the construction site of our time.
Hello, I'm Saeed Atif Rizwan, Director of the Catholic Muslim Studies Program and Associate Professor of Islamic and Intro to Studies at Catholic Theological Union. Under the section titled Reviving Dialogue, Pope Leo writes that at the political level, there's an urgent need to shift from the culture of power to a genuine culture of negotiation. When we look around both domestically and internationally, the culture of power is manifesting itself through harm and violence. Indeed, Pope Leo's critique of artificial intelligence considers the different ways in which power manifests itself in the digitized world. We have witnessed AI being used to murder innocent people across the world and help detain people here in the US. That AI can be so harmful in these ways is likely one reason Pope Leo urges a culture of negotiation, one that is premised on dialogue. The Pope also writes that interreligious dialogue can play a decisive role in bringing about peace, and I agree. But one challenge we face in dialogue is that dialogue itself is not neutral. Dialogue, too, can exhibit broader trends of cultures of power. AI models are not objective, and even if someone claims that they are, any person with a modicum of integrity knows that the concept of objectivity, especially in the field of the humanities, is a mirage. More often than not, the concept of objectivity is coded ideologically and structured by none other than those in power. Indeed, AI models are purportedly trained in numerous religious traditions, and such models are not coded to advocate for one religion over another. But AI models are built by and have access to documents available in the public. If public documents are biased negatively towards a particular religious tradition, if the programmers of AI models have their own biases, and if AI models are designed to mirror their users so that AI has a repeat customer who have their own biases, then you can imagine the aggregation of biased information that an AI can generate that a user may presume to be neutral. When it comes to religious and theological studies, or when it comes to generating knowledge about religious traditions for interreligious dialogue, AI can be problematic because of its biases and its pursuit of maintaining the attention of a user by reasserting a user's biases. Given the scourge of anti-Muslim bigotry and anti-Semitism permeating our society, a person runs the risk of interacting with AI that has a very real potential of reaffirming anti-Muslim bigotry and anti-Semitism, among other forms of religious hate. So the question one has to ask is, what do we do? I return to the encyclical of Pope Leo. We need human-to-human dialogue. We need human-to-human dialogue to identify and resolve biases that an AI model cannot. We need human-to-human dialogue to identify sources of power and push back against them. We need human-to-human dialogue to build coalitions of peace that can go toe-to-toe with coalitions of war. Whereas violence transcends religious affiliation, peace too can transcend religious affiliation. An interreligious coalition of peace is not only possible, but in the age of AI, it is necessary. The creation and longevity of an interreligious coalition of peace cannot be established on the basis of AI. Peace must be based on mutual understanding through dialogue to push against those who occupy the halls of power. To reaffirm Pope Leo's vision, authentic person-to-person dialogue can drive deep and meaningful peace building.
Hello, my name is Dr. C. Vanessa White, and I am the Associate Professor of Spirituality and Ministry and the Director of the Graduate Certificate in Black Theology and Ministry at Catholic Theological Union. On May 25, 2006, Pope Leo XIV presented his first papal encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, on safeguarding human dignity in the age of artificial intelligence. Like Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum, Magnifica Humanitas addresses the technological and digital paradigm represented by artificial intelligence, which, while offering tremendous possibilities, poses serious threats to humanity. For Black Catholics, whose family histories are intertwined with the transatlantic slave trade and the legacy of racial oppression in the Americas, the following words of Pope Leo XIV represent an unprecedented level of ecclesial self-examination and institutional accountability. As Pope Leo XIV states, I quote, "It was only in the 19th century that a formal, absolute, and universal condemnation of slavery was clearly articulated, notably under Pope Leo XIII. This development offers a clear example of the Church's growth in understanding the perennial truths of revelation that she safeguards. Although there was not always consistency in practice, given that slavery was long tolerated before being unequivocally condemned, there has been a continuous affirmation throughout history of the dignity of every human being created in the image of God, even if it took 18 centuries for its full incompatibility with slavery to be explicitly recognized. This constitutes a wound in Christian memory, one for which we cannot consider ourselves detached. It is impossible not to feel deep sorrow when contemplating the immense suffering and humiliation endured by so many, in stark contrast to their immeasurable dignity as persons infinitely loved by the Lord. For this, in the name of the Church, I sincerely ask for pardon." End quote. Pope Leo XIV's words are more than an apology. They are an invitation to truth-telling, repentance, and transformation. For Black Catholics, this acknowledgement of the Church's complicity in slavery affirms what generations have known, endured, and proclaimed. The wound is real. The memory is painful. Yet the faith of Black Catholics has remained steadfast. As Sister Thea Bowman reminded the Church over 30 years ago, as Black Catholics become bringing our whole selves, our history, our culture, our spirituality, our suffering, and our hope. We do not come as guests seeking acceptance, but as members of the body of Christ whose gifts have enriched the Church for centuries. The acknowledgement offered in Magnifica Humanitas challenges the Church not merely to remember the past, but to confront the lingering effects of racism and exclusion that remain present today. For Black Catholics, memory has always been central to faith and identity. The stories of enslavement, resistance, survival, and liberation are not distant history. They continue to shape communities today. The closure of Black Catholic parishes and schools, disparities in pastoral care, and the continued marginalization of Black voices in leadership demand serious examination and response. The scholarship of Father Cyprian Davis, who wrote The History of Black Catholics in the United States, the challenge issued by sociologist Dr. Tia Noel Pratt in her recent book, Black and Catholic, and the witness of generations of Black Catholics testify that faithfulness has endured despite injustice. Their voices remind us that reconciliation requires more than words. It requires justice. Pope Leo XIV writes that the memory of slavery must become, I quote, "a call to vigilance," end quote. He further states, I quote, "What we have learned must be translated into discernment and responsibility in the present. If we want to avoid the need to ask for pardon again in the future for having failed to respect the treasure of human dignity that is required by our faith, it falls to us today to denounce clearly and firmly trafficking in its many forms, and together with all who are committed to this cause, to support concrete efforts of prevention, protection, liberation, and rehabilitation, end quote. That vigilance demands that Catholics ask difficult questions about whose stories are remembered, whose communities are supported, and whose dignity is protected. If the Church is to avoid seeking pardon from future generations, it must actively safeguard the dignity of all God's children today. The apology has been made. The wound has been acknowledged. The question before the Church now is whether acknowledgement will lead to conversion. For Black Catholics, the hope is that this moment marks not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a deeper commitment to truth, justice, reconciliation, and the full flourishing of every person created in the image of God.